Welcome back to the Physician's Guide to Doctoring. On this week's episode, we have a guest host, so please be the same respectful audience you are for me and enjoy. In the world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized, just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're ensuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description.
Over 400 physicians die by suicide every year in the United States. September is National Suicide Prevention Month. Our guest today shares her battle with suicidality. Please note today's conversation comes with a trigger warning on the topic of suicide. If you or someone you know needs immediate help, please call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988.
Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. I am your guest host, Dr. Amna Shabbir, and I have a very special guest with me today. I just want to, before delving into the episode, give a trigger warning. We will be discussing about suicide in today's conversation. Our special guest for today is Dr. Jillian Rigert. She is an oral medicine specialist, head and neck cancer researcher, certified Martha Beck Wayfinder life coach, professional leadership coach, speaker, writer, and host of YouTube channel A Life True to You, where she helps high achievers break free from societal pressures to create sustainable, fulfilling lives true to themselves. She has been on a 10-year healing journey out of the depths of suicidality and anorexia nervosa, and she now shares her story and life lessons in hopes to help others reduce suffering, save lives, and live with intention. Welcome to the show, Jillian.
Thank you, Amna. I'm so grateful to be here with you.
I really want to honor your journey and the bravery that it is taking for you to be here today. And we are in September as we record, and this is National Suicide Prevention Month, and want to highlight not just the importance of this for this month, but it's important every month of the year. So please share with us your journey. And again, thank you for your courage to share.
I definitely feel grateful and honored that you have allowed me the opportunity to feel safe in talking about these topics that I think people are afraid to talk about because there's so much stigma and taboo. And part of my journey was 10 years ago. I was an oral maxillofacial surgery resident in the military, and I developed profound and pervasive suicidality. And at the time, thinking it was just me really exacerbated my internal dialogue that something was wrong with me. And it's in the one article I wrote on Kevin MD, he titled, "I Risked My Career to Save My Life." That was in 2022. So timeline, I went from Air Force, oral surgery, 2014 to 2017 with acute suicidality, to then being medically discharged because I sought mental health support, to then navigating the civilian sector, feeling so much guilt and shame about having trouble with my mental health because I thought it was just me, to then finally deciding in 2022 I was just going to release it with the expectation at that time that I wouldn't be here. I had really critical illness with anorexia nervosa, which I now know was quite a numbing agent for that deep psychic. I say that because I now talk openly knowing how much that pain was exacerbated by the isolation caused by mental health stigma and these narratives around what it means to be struggling with questions of, does my life matter? Can I go on? Or thoughts about what are people going to think about me if I quit this job, if I change careers? Like all of that now at the age I'm at, I'm like, oh my gosh, like all of that was just so painful, but it doesn't matter. Like all of that stuff is so superficial. It's a societal construct of all these judgments in this competition over things that if you were sitting on your deathbed just don't matter. And so we have these conversations. I had some with you on my channel, and the one that we have today is just to step back and challenge these narratives that we've ingrained within our brains that increase suffering and are likely contributing to people taking their own lives.
There's so much that you share over there. And the words that really stand out for me are shame and guilt and reflecting from your deathbed. What really matters?
Yeah, and interestingly, I was in the hospital for anorexia because I was in a critical state. And in 2016, it was like this boom, profound like clarity that I was reflecting back. I'm like, oh my gosh, all of the stuff I was chasing, all of the things I'm worried about, they just don't matter. I wasn't at the point in my life to receive that and to apply it. So what I mean by that is the hospital couldn't keep me because they didn't have the resources to manage the medical complications I was having from anorexia. So I was discharged from an eating disorder facility because I was too medically compromised, and I was discharged from a medical facility because they didn't have eating disorder specialty care. So here I am, a medical professional whose care was dictated by my insurance at the time, which was TRICARE, because I was in the military, and TRICARE reimbursement's so poor that you are limited in what will actually cover your treatment. Being told I was too sick from multiple different types of facilities, with the clarity that, oh my gosh, everything in my life that I thought mattered doesn't, in terms of all the things I sacrificed to get to where I was, which included relationships, time with loved ones, my health. Like all those things were so clear. But because I wasn't ready to face that, I went right back to residency. I just took off my FMLA. And so I say that because I don't want people to judge themselves. When we have this profound clarity, we need support in order to not only to take it in and absorb it. There's so much pain that comes from the awareness that everything you thought mattered, everything that you sacrificed in your life is for the betterment of a value that's not even your own. So that's really painful. So in 2016, like I said, I wasn't ready to receive that. I was again in the hospital in 2017. And I just didn't have the tools. I didn't have the conversations. So these conversations matter. The coaching you do matters. The Instagram post that you have, the post that you have on social media where people can actually hear and integrate into this new perspective on a daily basis is so important.
That is so powerful when you state every little step matters, and kind of we're normalizing the narrative here. You don't have to suffer alone. And that loneliness, that profound sense of, wow, it's just me. And all of a sudden, I'm standing where I am, realizing everything that I work towards really doesn't matter to me. The hamster wheel that I was put on was just a hamster wheel. The conveyor belt was just a conveyor belt. And to step away from it and recognize, but what do I do now? That you use the word that is acutely painful. And I absolutely would say a resounding yes to that. And so you decided to go back to training, and you decided to further train. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's how we can use coaching against ourselves. I actually didn't know anything about like formal mindset coaching, but I just thought because it was just me and I like to be strong. A value of mine is to be strong mentally and physically. And interestingly, like anorexia made me feel strong, but I was becoming weaker and weaker physically and mentally eventually. But because I valued showing up strong and I had associated my worthiness with this perception of strength, meaning become this military surgeon, I was so tightly attached to that destination because the whole arrival fallacy, I will be worthy when, I will be happy when, I'll be content when. And so the movement toward oral surgery again was for fear of the loneliness and the emptiness that came with, okay, I didn't have any values-based identity. I hadn't developed myself and my identity outside of my achievements. So the going back to work, the things like the workaholism, we can relate anorexia, workaholism, social media, substance abuse, alcoholism, all those things that we grasp onto because we're not at a point that we're willing to sit with those uncomfortable emotions. And for me, those are what I was saying with that, when I realized that everything that I had focused on in hopes that it would give me that sense of worthiness, when I didn't obtain that, and then to further exacerbate the sense that I was unworthy by thinking that I was a failure if I left surgery and that I was a disgrace and that I was letting people down. All of that just really accentuated the pain in my heart. And I do want to put context to it. I mean, I was so sleep deprived. I was so malnourished. So those elements alone cloud our capacity to have proper judgment. So if people are in that depths of profound burnout, moral injury, PTSD, exhaustion, it's really hard to have clarity on all the options that exist and to challenge your own thoughts. Like the next step in those situations is to rest and really allow your system to recuperate and get to a point where you've optimized your physical, your mental, your spiritual, your emotional wellness, and then say, okay, now what are my deeper life meaning and purpose, right?
So instead of pausing and resting, where I know we've had a separate conversation where rest is equated to laziness a lot of times in our mind, instead of honoring our basic human needs, the basic physiologic needs that you need for sleep, hydration, and appropriate nutrition, instead of that, the answer is always to do more, and really to do more from a depleted place and space. And as you say this, you share your story, but I hear that, and you've heard that in so many other stories where we go from point A to point B without any rest in the middle, because dare we sleep for a little bit, instantly the labels are going to change. And a lot of times those labels are internal and external because we have been conditioned along the way. And as I've been reading a lot of work surrounding perfectionism, and there was a study that talked about how when you talk about worthiness and identity tied to what really is based on performance as opposed to values, and I'll have you expand on that a little bit, but one of the data points that I read was 2/3 of young adults right now feel like they don't matter in US and Canada. Like that feeling that it depends on what you're achieving, what you're doing, and that feeling of mattering, that you don't matter. Like, how can we sit with those words?
Yeah, and here's the risk of you don't matter. That's something I talk about a lot because it was a narrative that goes through my head. I mean, it still fleets through my head quite often. And am I doing enough? We know that. I saw you with the picture Never Enough, which is a good book to really contemplate what enough means and where we get this idea that we're never enough. And you said perfectionism. Well, perfectionism's unattainable. So there's always this gap in where you are and where you could be because it's unattainable. So you're creating, if you create that as the measurement of worthiness, then you're setting yourself up for self-sabotage because you'll never obtain that. And you'll always be measuring the gap, forgetting about the gain, never having contention. And when it comes to mattering in suicidality, when I was experiencing the acute types of suicidality, because I didn't think I mattered and I thought I was a burden and I thought that people would be better off without me, it felt like me taking my own life would reduce the suffering of others around me rather than add to it. So when you are believing that you don't matter, you might frame suicidality in a different way than when you realize how much you are valued, how much you were loved, how much pain it would cause the people around you to lose you. And there were two things I was reading about when I was intellectualizing suicidality as I was experiencing it and its deepest grip, because I was trying to say, what are the risk factors and how can I protect myself against these risk factors? Like in these moments, what moves somebody from suicidal ideation to suicide? And the presence of hope was a protective factor, and feeling like a burden was a factor that contributed to people from going from suicidal ideation to suicide. And for further context, the things that I had that were increasing my risk, my formal training was as a dentist. I was in medical school. I was in the military. I had anorexia. All of those independently increase your risk for suicide. And part of that can be the performance-based identities, the high achievers that go towards that, how much we attach our worthiness and this perfectionism. Like, what are the common factors in those people who pursue those careers or develop anorexia? Like, there's so many that came to mind that were like, oh yeah, I see why I was developing so much psychache and had so much emptiness. Because if we think what matters is what we do, and that performance-based identity, then we might mold ourselves to fit in or to be this person that we're not. And the further we get away from our authentic selves, the more empty we feel, the more lonely we feel. And all of this just snowballs into this, okay, you know what? I have so much psychache. It's never going to go away. I'd rather just not be here.
It's the end of another busy day. You just saw 20, 30 patients, maybe more. Instead of heading home for dinner with your spouse or playing with your kids, you now begin your night job, charting. Charting is critical for patient care, billing, and medical legal liability, but it steals our focus from our patients, eats away at our time with our families, and keeps us up at night. The burden of always having another chart to complete drains all of us. Freed listens, prepares your notes, and writes patient instructions for you. Charting is done before your patient walks out of the room. Wait, because it gets better. Freed learns your style over time. It's AI, just like a human scribe would, except it will never quit on you. Freed is loved by 3,000 plus clinicians from every specialty. It's HIPAA compliant, takes 30 seconds to learn, and costs only $99 a month. You can try Freed for free right now by going to freed.ai, Freed.ai. Listeners of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring can use the code PGD50 for $50 off the first month.
There is so much there, Jillian, and I really want to touch on those two that you've mentioned, the value-based identity and performance-based identity, because that really hits home for so many of the physicians that are listening to this podcast right now, and they're thinking, who I am and my innate worthiness is tied to how much I produce versus just who I am. That's a lot. Thank you for sharing that with us. So here you are right now, and you have been so vocal. You have been so generous with your experience and your journey in a time that is extremely dark, extremely personal. I see your social media posts, and it lifts me up in a way that I feel that we're honoring so many lives as you speak. So looking back, there's something you shared was your 10-year reflection journey.
Mm-hmm.
What comes up for you? And I would love, and I know that the audience would love to hear your reflections right now from where you are.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones was I developed so much self-compassion, which most people are deficient in. Had I developed self-compassion at the time and a mindset of curiosity rather than judgment, I really would have reduced my own internal suffering. Had I extracted myself from perfectionism and this belief that I had to know everything before I learned it, I could have had more clarity on if oral surgery was the path for me, or if that pain I was feeling, was it caused by that feeling of I didn't belong because I didn't think I was enough. If I could have challenged those beliefs at the time, I could have gained more clarity about my career. I have pain from thinking if I only knew, right? And I did lose my military career for getting mental health support. And sometimes I think now, well, that was a gift to me because I can speak freely without fear that I'm going to lose my career. I've already lost it. And what that also highlighted to me was, okay, so afraid to lose my career that I was willing to lose my life. And so at the time, it was just so clear to me that if I left oral surgery, that guilt and shame would have been so catastrophic to me. Again, this is a thought error, but this was the reality of what I was experiencing at the time. I thought that leaving oral surgery and potentially being medically discharged from the Air Force, which I ultimately was, I thought it would cause so much guilt and shame that I wouldn't want to be seen again. I would have been such a disgrace that I would rather not be alive. So that thought, that belief, led me to think the only two choices I had were to continue the path of oral surgery or to take my own life. Those were just very clear. I was so tired, I didn't have other options. And now I would just think, and I go back, and you talked about not giving myself that chance to pause and step away. I would have stepped away to audit what's really going on here. What's the psychic telling me that I need? And again, shifting that narrative from what's wrong with me to what do I need in these moments, from a place of curiosity without judgment, grounded in self-compassion. And for those who haven't heard me say it, I say it a lot about Brene Brown. Brene Brown's research showed that the people with the highest levels of mental toughness have high levels of self-compassion. So when we are trying to beat ourselves down, to build ourselves up stronger, we talk about pimping culture in surgery and this whole normalized construct of, I'm going to tear you down because I think that's what you need to rebuild yourself. Well, no, especially people with long history of childhood trauma who are abused and they took it, and then they have low self-esteem and you kick them when they're down. That was never going to be a winning path for leadership for me, but I took it because that's what I was used to. That's what I thought I deserved. And so developing self-compassion was like putting glasses on that allowed me to see, like, that's a them issue. Like, that's not healthy. That's showing me something that's innately something that they need to work through. And I can love myself in these moments. I can set boundaries. I'm not going to take or tolerate this abuse. And that's important because we know healthcare. You help early career attendings and all attendings throughout the spectrums of their careers. If they haven't developed self-compassion, they may be thinking that abuse that they're experiencing and that they're tolerating is what they deserve. And let's just validate that this abuse is being given by people who are late career. It doesn't just stop in training. So we need to shift what we're going to accept. And that starts with our own internal dialogue. Again, self-compassion. And if you haven't found the resources, go on selfcompassion.org. Kristen Neff's resources, highly recommend.
Jillian, thank you for sharing that. I think the biggest shift for me personally for well-being was self-compassion. And I love how you beautifully articulated it. It's almost like creating a self-compassionate boundary and being able to step away and recognize, well, what are the facts here? What am I experiencing and what is being done to me? And instead of not everything being a mesh, like you've mentioned, the way I call it the trauma transfer cycle in medicine, where people who were above us underwent so much, didn't take a pause to be self-compassionate, didn't put that boundary. And everything is also marinated in the drive for maladaptive perfectionism. And then we're looking at each other and where does this end and where does this lead? And it's almost so intertwined that it's very hard to separate what is being done to you with who you are, with what you want in life. And you're absolutely right. Having that clarity, and selfcompassion.org is a wonderful resource site.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't agree more that trauma transfer, that really speaks to what I've observed and what I've experienced.
So Jillian, as we wrap up for today, this conversation, which was, I know it's going to touch many hearts. Knowing what you know now, if you were to look back, and if anyone is listening to this episode and they're just in a bad place right now, what would you say to your former self or that person who's listening to your words right now?
I think a core message I want to resonate in someone's head anytime they are contemplating if they may need to take their own life because they feel trapped, in medicine in particular, but anywhere, is nothing in your career is more important than your life. Nothing. And I didn't know how to accept that as true. So if the mind starts to object and find ways that that's true in the alternative, meaning that I'm nothing without this career, trust me, 10 years of healing experience that looks back on that, and I cannot believe that narrative that I would rather not be here than face the disgrace of leaving a career that I thought once defined me. You will find the people who truly support you, the being that you are, like we have found each other, Amna, when you allow yourself to lean into this healing journey, to stop abandoning yourself and your needs. But again, that main takeaway that I would recommend starting with is nothing in my career is more important than my life. If you don't believe it right away, lean on us for support, because the healing journey will help bring you back to who you are and what matters most to you.
You matter. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Jillian. And if folks want to get in touch with you, how can they learn more about your journey?
Yeah, I think community is very important. So a Life True to You YouTube community is where they might be able to resonate with even more stories. You're on there. And that YouTube is what I lean into for a community in my own times of suffering. So I recommend that if you're looking for a community. Of course, they can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook more than I'd like to admit. So find me there if you can relate, and we'll find some ways to navigate social media together.
Thank you for sharing that, Jillian. And if anyone listening right now is feeling that they need help or they're in any crisis form, please call or text 988, which is the suicide crisis hotline. Thank you so much for your listening in today.
Yep. Thank you for being here.
Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice or financial advice or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.